The work progressed faster than he had anticipated, but Garrett's keen mason's eye noted potential problems even before the first test. The uneven floor showed slight depressions, and the loose soil walls were likely to shed moisture. Furthermore, the perfectly level run offered no gradient for drainage or natural air movement. The summer storm that struck in late July proved his concerns to be justified. 3 days of relentless rain saturated the ground above the tunnel, and seepage exploited every weakness in the rough excavation. Water pooled in the low spots, turning sections of the floor into mud. Condensation formed on the dirt walls where temperature differences were most pronounced. Within a week, the standing water at the tunnel bottom reached depths that threatened the entire concept. Garrett measured the depth of the puddles using a willow stick, methodically checking every few feet along the tunnel's length. The deepest spots coincided with the slight depressions he had overlooked during excavation. However, the pattern also revealed a more significant problem. Without a consistent fall towards daylight, the water had nowhere to go. Without smooth, dense walls to shed moisture and reduce friction, the air would cling to the rough surfaces instead of flowing freely. The level run, which had seemed logical for moving air, was actually working against the natural buoyancy that would drive the circulation. His solution required starting over with a level of precision that frontier work rarely demanded. He recut the tunnel bottom with a uniform 3/4 of an inch fall per foot for the first 22 feet, creating a definite downhill grade from the foundation towards the hillside mouth. This drainage leg would carry away condensation and storm water, while establishing the first half of a thermosiphon loop. At the lowest point, he excavated a sump and installed a 6-inch bed of river gravel, then cut a narrow French drain that daylight below the intake mouth, ensuring that no water could accumulate anywhere within the system. The final 18 feet required the opposite grade, rising at half an inch per foot back up to the cabin foundation. This gentle upward slope would complete the convection circuit, allowing warmed air that had given up its heat to the surrounding mass to rise naturally back towards the building. The physics were subtle but crucial. Too steep, and turbulence would disrupt the flow. Too gentle, and the buoyancy would be insufficient to drive the circulation. Relining the tunnel with dry-laid fieldstone transformed the rough excavation into a precision instrument. Garrett carefully selected each stone, fitting them into walls 4 inches thick that would provide thermal mass while creating smooth interior surfaces. Each stone was placed to shed water downward and inward, directing any moisture towards the gravel drain. The crown required particular attention, with stones interlocked to prevent settlement while maintaining the precise cross-section needed for optimal airflow. The limesand parge coat that followed represented old-world finishing applied to frontier innovation. Garrett mixed local lime with fine river sand and applied the wash thinly enough to preserve the stone's thermal mass while creating surfaces smooth enough to minimize air turbulence. The finished tunnel measured 18 inches wide by 22 inches high, dimensions chosen to maximize heat transfer while maintaining adequate flow capacity. At the hillside mouth, Garrett constructed the solar collector that had drawn so much ridicule from his neighbors. This simple wooden box, painted black inside and fitted with a hinged mica pane scavenged from an old stove door, would trap the morning sun and preheat the incoming air before it entered the tunnel proper. The mica window could be opened for cleaning or closed to maximize heat gain, while a removable screen kept insects and debris from entering the system. The foundation end required equally careful execution. Garrett cut a stone vent measuring 10 by 12 inches through the cabin wall and fitted it with a hand-forged damper, an adjustable louver that would allow precise control of airflow. Above, near the cabin's ridge, he bored a 4-inch vent hole to complete the circulation path. Warmed air rising in the cabin would escape through this upper opening, creating the stack effect that would draw fresh air through the tunnel below. Testing came on a bright October afternoon when Garrett lit a sulfur match at the hillside collector mouth. The acrid smoke threaded inward without hesitation, disappearing into the tunnel and emerging minutes later from the cabin's ridge vent. His indoor thermometer, positioned away from any other heat source, recorded a climb from 46 degrees at mid-afternoon to 60 degrees by dusk. No wood had been burned, No coal had glowed, yet the cabin's interior temperature had risen 14 degrees simply from air warmed by the autumn sun and tempered by the Earth's steady heat. The tunnel worked exactly as calculated, validating principles that would not be formally documented for another century. Word of Garrett's progress spread through the valley as autumn advanced, and the community found itself unexpectedly divided. Doc Abernathy, whose medical practice took him to cabins throughout the region, had observed enough poorly ventilated winter quarters to appreciate any system that promised fresh air circulation. When Garrett mentioned needing help with the lime wash application, the physician arrived with brush and bucket, working alongside the mountaineer to apply the smooth finish that would reduce air friction and improve flow dynamics. Abernathy's participation lent unexpected credibility to the project, suggesting that medical wisdom supported innovation over tradition. Reverend Josiah Martin took the opposite position, expressing concerns that resonated with families responsible for their children's health through the long winter months. The minister worried aloud about stagnant vapors that might accumulate in the underground passages, carrying disease or unhealthy air into living spaces. His warnings drew support from parents who remembered children sickening in tight, poorly ventilated cabins during previous winters. Martin's opposition carried particular weight because it framed the tunnel not as merely unconventional, but as potentially dangerous to family welfare. Mary Ellen Corbett occupied middle ground between support and skepticism. Her offer to sew a felt curtain for the interior damper suggested practical acceptance of the system while hedging against its failure. If the tunnel proved inadequate, the curtain could seal the vent completely, allowing conventional heating to take over without wasting the warmth generated by the stove or hearth. Her willingness to contribute labor indicated cautious optimism, even as she privately doubted the elaborate system would outperform her reliable cook stove and quilted door barriers. Tom Rigsby remained the tunnel's most vocal critic, his wagon-borne commentary growing sharper as completion approached. From his driver's seat, he would shout encouragement to quit and buy iron, his voice carrying the frustration of a man watching a neighbor ignore perfectly adequate solutions. Rigsby had rebuilt his 5-foot hearth that summer, enlarging the firebox and improving the 12 by 12-inch stone flue based on decades of experience with Appalachian heating. His investment in conventional improvements made Garrett's experiment seem not just foolish, but personally insulting. Anil Boone provided the technical validation that mattered most to Garrett. The elder stonemason examined the tunnel's construction with professional eyes, running his hands along the parged walls and checking the grade with practiced assessment. His verdict carried weight throughout the community. Stone it right, and it'll keep weather like a cave. Boone's endorsement drew on 40 years of digging cellars and building foundations, experience that confirmed the tunnel's structural soundness, even if its heating function remained unproven. Garrett completed his construction in 4 distinct phases during November, working with the methodical pace of a craftsman who understood that precision mattered more than speed. 9 days of cutting and grading established the final dimensions and drainage patterns. 6 days of stonework and parging created the thermal mass and smooth surfaces essential for heat transfer. 2 days sufficed for the collector box and mica installation, work that required carpentry skills rather than masonry. 3 final days completed the foundation vent and damper system, connecting the underground network to the cabin's interior space. The finished system represented a remarkable achievement in frontier engineering. The 40-foot tunnel maintained its 18 by 22-inch cross-section throughout, with 6 inches of gravel providing drainage beneath the 4-inch thick stone walls. The 22-foot downhill leg carried water to daylight, while the 18-foot rise completed the thermosiphon circuit. Moisture control features included continuous floor drainage, inspection weeps along the lower section, and a roofed collector box that shed rain while admitting sun. Air quality safeguards featured a removable intake screen and an interior damper accessible for cleaning and adjustment. Meanwhile, his neighbors pressed forward with their own winter preparations, applying the tested methods that had served the valley for generations. Caleb McBride doubled his stovepipe length and installed a tin heat shedder to capture more warmth from the rising gases. Tom Rigsby completed his hearth rebuilding and laid in extra oak, confident that the increased firebox capacity would handle any cold the season might bring. Mary Ellen Corbett's family maintained their cook stove at banking temperature and hung additional quilts as door curtains, creating the layered defense against cold that represented frontier best practice. By mid-December, Garrett's preliminary trials revealed the tunnel's remarkable capabilities. On sunny days, his cabin reached 60 to 65 degrees without any fire. The stones surrounding the foundation vent remained warm to the touch at dawn. During cloudy periods, he needed only a small coal bed for cooking, allowing the tunnel to carry the primary heating load while consuming a fraction of the wood his neighbors claimed they were burning. Indoor temperature logs, which he maintained with the precision of a man accustomed to measuring and recording, showed consistent performance that defied conventional wisdom about winter heating requirements. The system that had provoked such controversy was quietly proving its worth. But the true test lay ahead, in the depths of winter, when survival would depend on heating systems performing flawlessly under extreme conditions. 16 winters passed before nature delivered the ultimate test of every heating system in the valley. The Great Arctic Outbreak began on February 10, 1899, when a massive high-pressure system settled over the eastern United States, drawing air from the Canadian prairies and driving temperatures to levels not recorded since weather observations began. Weather Bureau stations across Virginia registered readings that shattered previous records, with Stunton falling to 12 degrees below zero and Monterey and Highland County plunging to 29 below. Deep snow blanketed the region for days, while iron-gray skies blocked any solar gain that might have moderated the assault. Caleb McBride's rebuilt heating system faced its first true challenge as the cold deepened beyond anything his No. 8 parlor stove was designed to handle. Despite running the firebox red-hot at supper time and banking coals through the night, his indoor thermometers recorded a steady decline that left morning temperatures in the 30s. The tin heat shutter he had installed with such confidence proved inadequate against a sustained cold, and his doubled stovepipe sections drew so hard they created downdrafts that chilled the room faster than the stove could warm it. By the third day of the outbreak, ice crystals formed on the interior walls despite the stove glowing continuously, and McBride found himself burning coal and wood simultaneously just to prevent his water bucket from freezing solid. Tom Rigsby's enlarged hearth, built on principles passed down through generations of Blue Ridge families, consumed wood at a rate that would have seemed impossible before the crisis. His rebuilt firebox, with its improved 12 by 12-inch flue, drew magnificently, creating the powerful draft that hearth builders considered essential for cold weather performance. Yet, even burning half a wagon load of seasoned oak in 3 days, his cabin's interior barely maintained temperatures in the low 40s. The clay-lime daubing around his chimney base cracked under thermal stress as exterior stones contracted faster than interior masonry, creating gaps that admitted frigid air directly into the living space. Frost accumulated on the inner face of his rebuilt flue, clear evidence that even his improved design could not transfer heat faster than the Arctic air could steal it away. Mary Ellen Corbett's cook stove strategy, refined through years of frontier winters, collapsed entirely under conditions no previous season had prepared her to face. The cast iron stove that had reliably warmed her family through countless cold nights now cycled between glowing red and stone cold, as fuel demands exceeded any reasonable consumption rate. Her quilted door curtains and carefully chinked walls, adequate for normal winter conditions, proved helpless against cold that penetrated every material barrier. By dawn of the second day, the family was sleeping in coats and shawls, while their wash basin developed a skin of ice despite being positioned near the stove's maximum heat output. Against this backdrop of systematic failure, Garrett's tunnel performed with mechanical consistency that seemed to mock the struggle surrounding it. His daily temperature log, maintained with the precision of a man who understood the importance of documentation, recorded interior temperatures that remained between 58 and 62 degrees throughout the worst of the outbreak. On the clouded days when no direct sunlight reached the collector mouth, he burned small amounts of coal for cooking while the tunnel provided the primary heating load. On the single clear day that followed the front's passage, when brilliant sun struck the mica-fronted collector, his cabin reached 65 degrees without any combustion whatsoever. The thermal performance represented only part of the tunnel's vindication. While neighbors watched their heating systems consume unprecedented amounts of fuel, Garrett's wood consumption remained roughly one-tenth that of standard cabins within a mile radius. His carefully documented usage showed that even during the outbreak's worst days, he burned less in a week than his neighbors consumed in a single day. The tunnel's thermal mass, charged by whatever solar gain was available and sustained by the Earth's steady temperature, provided consistent heat output regardless of surface conditions. Structural integrity proved equally decisive during the extreme conditions. The tunnel's stone-lined crown showed no evidence of frost heave despite ground temperatures that split foundation stones elsewhere in the valley. The continuous drainage system prevented ice formation that might have damaged the collector or blocked air circulation. The lime-washed interior dried quickly when air movement resumed after each storm passage, while the gravel bed maintained drainage even when surface runoff was frozen solid. Meanwhile, conventional systems suffered damage that would require extensive spring repairs. Two neighbors lost sections of clay-lime daubing when thermal cycling cracked the material beyond its elastic limits. Rigsby discovered a sheared chimney stone where frost expansion had overcome the masonry's tensile strength. Multiple families reported interior wall damage where condensation had frozen and expanded, a testament to heating systems that could not maintain consistent interior conditions. The Weather Bureau's official documentation of the outbreak's severity, combined with the measured performance of competing heating methods, created an irrefutable record of relative effectiveness. When roads reopened after the 14th, the community faced evidence that challenged 2 centuries of accepted wisdom about winter survival in the Virginia mountains. The transformation began within days of the roads reopening. Tom Rigsby appeared first at Garrett's door, his earlier mockery replaced by the subdued demeanor of a man whose assumptions had been shattered by measurable results. Standing hat in hand beside the tunnel's hillside mouth, Rigsby studied the mica-fronted collector that had seemed so foolish months earlier, now seeking to understand the principles that had kept one cabin comfortable while his own nearly froze his family. Hiram Pike followed close behind, his previous certainty about heat rising and air sinking replaced by questions about grades, drainage, and stone thickness that revealed a mind grappling with uncomfortable new realities. Doc Abernathy's inquiry carried a different weight, representing professional interest rather than personal desperation. The physician had observed the health effects of poorly heated cabins throughout the valley, watching families struggle with respiratory ailments that seemed linked to smoke-heavy heating and inadequate ventilation. His questions focused on adapting the tunnel concept to his own practice, wondering whether a medical office might benefit from the clean, consistent air circulation that had impressed him during his assistance with the lime washing months earlier. Even Reverend Josiah Martin, whose warnings about stagnant vapors had influenced community opinion against the project, found himself reconsidering positions that extreme cold had tested and found wanting. The minister's inquiry about a Christian version of that cave pipe reflected his struggle to reconcile doctrinal concerns with practical results that had saved his neighbor from the suffering he had witnessed in other homes. His interest in adapting the system for a schoolhouse suggested recognition that children's welfare might outweigh theoretical objections to unconventional methods. Garrett's response to these inquiries established the technical foundation that would guide future installations throughout the region. Standing beside his tunnel mouth, he rapped the parged stone with his knuckles to demonstrate the solidity that skeptics had questioned, then laid out the principles that governed successful earth-air systems. The south-facing intake, with its simple collector cover, concentrated the winter sun while protecting the entry from rain and debris. A constant drainage fall on the initial run prevented water accumulation that could freeze and block circulation or create the unhealthy stagnation that critics had feared. The rise back to the foundation provided the gentle lift that completed the natural convection. Stone or concrete lining offered both the thermal mass essential for heat storage and the smooth surfaces necessary for efficient airflow. The gravel bed and daylight drain handled moisture from condensation and ground seepage, addressing the structural concerns that had doomed his first attempt. A screened intake kept insects and animals from contaminating the air supply, while the controllable interior damper and small ceiling vent completed the circulation loop that made the entire system function as intended. Within 3 winters, Variations of Garrett's design appeared across a dozen homesteads along the South River and into the Deerfield Valley. Each installation adapted the core principles to local conditions and builder skills, creating a family of related systems rather than exact copies. Some featured longer runs that took advantage of favorable terrain, while others incorporated double inlets that increased airflow capacity for larger spaces. Most included the mica-fronted collector. Here's the translated and rewritten text, aiming for clarity and a slightly expanded style. The distinctive hood, initially a target of ridicule, ultimately proved indispensable for maximizing solar heat absorption during the region's brief winter days. Inspired by Garrett's work, a stonemason near Craigsville broadened the concept to encompass public buildings. He expertly constructed a 60-foot subterranean tunnel, featuring a dual-path airflow system, to efficiently heat a church hall. This hall's heating demands exceeded the capacity of standard residential systems. His skillful execution convincingly demonstrated that Garrett's principles could be effectively scaled up. This, in turn, encouraged other artisans to explore earth-air systems for a variety of commercial and institutional applications. Some builders began experimenting by connecting these systems to existing cellars. The tunnel served to moderate the temperature of incoming air, ideal for food preservation, while also providing supplemental warmth to the main living areas above. The widespread adoption of this technique throughout the region led to the establishment of technical standards, guidelines that would endure long after the original installations were built. Root cellars and naturally temperature-stable underground spaces were already familiar features of Appalachian life. However, the innovation of the tunnel put this inherent earth stability to work for active heating, rather than simply passive storage. Builders refined their techniques, learning to orient air intakes towards the winter sun, ensure consistent drainage throughout the tunnel's length, and incorporate sufficient thermal mass to optimize heat transfer and storage. Looking back through the lens of modern analysis, Garrett's 1883 innovation foreshadowed concepts that wouldn't receive formal recognition until a century later. Passive annual heat storage systems, thermal labyrinths, and ground-to-air heat transfer installations all rely on the fundamental principles he discovered through careful observation and ingenious frontier engineering. The Earth's capacity as a massive thermal battery, the efficiency of south-facing solar collection, the heat transfer potential of long, buried pathways, and the natural air circulation created by the chimney effect all became recognized elements of sustainable building design. Contemporary case studies and meticulous field measurements would eventually provide quantifiable data to support Garrett's intuitive understanding of Virginia's ground temperatures, optimal solar orientation, and the benefits of buried air pathways. The documented performance of modern earth-air systems validated the frontier instinct to harness natural forces for heating, confirming that innovative thinking and skillful implementation could achieve results that defied conventional expectations. Rockbridge County, Virginia, 1883. While his neighbors hurried to finish their standard stone fireplaces before the harsh winter set in, Elias Garrett, a 43-year-old mountaineer, was engaged in a different pursuit. He was digging and excavating a 40-foot underground tunnel. This tunnel sloped gently down from a sun-drenched hillside before curving back upwards to meet the foundation of his cabin. Tom Rigsby, with a touch of mockery, dubbed it a rabbit hole to nowhere. Hiram Pike, equally skeptical, chuckled, "Heat doesn't run downhill, Eli. Even smoke knows better than that." Then came February 1899, a month marked by the Great Arctic Outbreak. For 16 consecutive days, a bone-chilling cold gripped the region. Stuntton plummeted to a frigid 12 degrees below zero, while Monterey recorded an even more severe 29 below. Standard fireplaces, the traditional defense against winter's fury, proved woefully inadequate. Neighbors burned firewood constantly, yet they still woke to indoor temperatures barely reaching the 30s. Ice formed on the interior walls, even 10 feet away from the roaring fires. In stark contrast, Garrett's seemingly bizarre tunnel system maintained a steady, comfortable temperature of 60 to 65 degrees, all while consuming almost no firewood at all. What was it that this Blue Ridge blacksmith understood about the earth beneath his feet, a knowledge that had eluded 2 centuries of conventional heating wisdom? Elias Garrett arrived in Rockbridge County that April, bringing with him more than just the typical settler's belongings. He carried years of experience as a mason across the upper Shenandoah Valley, where he had constructed dry-laid limestone foundations that protected cabins from the destructive force of frost heave. He also had experience working at a blacksmith's forge in Augusta County, where he learned the invaluable lesson that solving problems often meant building the solution yourself. The winter of 1882 had nearly claimed his life with a bout of pneumonia, leaving his lungs raw from the smoke-filled air produced by traditional heating methods. This experience solidified his determination to find a cleaner, more efficient way to heat his home. When he claimed his plot of land along the South River, he brought with him his hard-earned knowledge and an unwavering resolve to do better. His chestnut cabin, measuring a modest 17 by 20 feet, sat squarely on its limestone foundation. The dovetail corners were tightly fitted to keep out the winter wind, and fresh clay-lime daubing filled every gap. By all conventional measures, it was a standard construction, except for the innovative system he planned beneath it. While his neighbors focused on the size of their fireplaces and the draw of their chimneys, Garrett meticulously studied the land itself. The south-facing slope, located 30 paces from his door, caught the winter sun from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, precisely the exposure favored by experienced locals for root cellars and springhouses. He had observed how these buried spaces maintained consistent temperatures year-round, remaining cool during the summer heat and relatively warm compared to the surface air when winter's grip tightened. The idea that began to form in his mind challenged every conventional assumption about heating. Instead of burning wood to create heat, why not capture the sun's energy and store it within the earth itself? The ground several feet below the surface held temperatures in the mid-50s to around 60 degrees, even during the coldest depths of the Virginia winter. If he could warm the air at a south-facing collector, channel it through a long underground path surrounded by stone mass, and then bring it up into his cabin, the earth would act as a massive thermal battery, storing and releasing heat as needed. The natural draft created by his cabin stack effect would pull the warmed air through the system without requiring any mechanical pumping. Tom Rigsby was the first to spot Garrett stringing a line level and marking the route of the trench on a clear May morning. The older farmer paused his wagon, carefully studied the stakes and string, and shook his head with a laugh reserved for obvious foolishness. When Garrett explained his reasoning about ground temperature and solar gain, Rigsby's amusement only intensified. Heat rises, he stated matter-of-factly. Everyone knew that. Smoke rises. Hot air rises. The very idea of sending air downhill to get warmer defied common sense. Hiram Pike, while hauling split oak past the worksite, stopped long enough to offer his own assessment of the project. A man could dig all he wanted, he declared, but physics was physics. Cold air sank, warm air rose, and no amount of trenching would alter the fundamental laws that governed every fireplace and stove in the valley. Pike had spent enough winters feeding fireplaces to know what worked, and what was merely wishful thinking. Mary Ellen Corbett offered a different perspective when she visited the following week. Managing her own homestead had taught her the value of proven methods over unproven theories. When Garrett mentioned his plans for a hinged mica pane at the hillside entrance to create a rudimentary solar collector, she could barely suppress a smile. The image of a window built for subterranean creatures seemed to perfectly capture the absurdity of the entire undertaking. Why complicate winter heating when a proper stove and good chinking had served families reliably for generations? Caleb McBride, whose number 8 parlor stove was the pride of his cabin, offered the most direct evaluation. His iron stove, tall stovepipe, and steady coal bed represented the pinnacle of heating technology. Store-bought reliability, he asserted, trumped homemade experiments every time. When the first frost arrived and the tunnel proved as useless as he expected, Garrett would be back, humbly asking to borrow stovepipe and fittings, just like any sensible man. Even Doc Abernathy, who generally supported innovation and fresh air in the often stuffy winter quarters, expressed reservations about the project's scope. The sheer amount of digging and stonework seemed disproportionate to any potential benefit. Reverend Josiah Martin voiced concerns about stagnant vapors and unhealthy air circulation, worries that resonated deeply with families responsible for their children's health throughout the long winter months. But Garrett pressed forward with the quiet confidence of a man who had successfully solved problems before. He had meticulously calculated the angles, measured the distances, and thoroughly understood the principles at play. The south-facing slope would concentrate the winter sun. The Earth's consistent temperature would moderate the air. The long, stone-lined path would transfer heat to the surrounding mass. And the cabin's natural stack effect would complete the circulation loop. What appeared to be excessive work to his neighbors represented the careful harnessing of natural forces that they had simply never considered. As the summer progressed and the scope of his project became increasingly clear, the community settled into a state of amused observation. Garrett's tunnel would either validate an ingenious understanding of natural heating or provide the valley with a memorable example of misguided ambition. Garrett's initial excavation began in early June, and by midsummer, he had carved a nearly level trench, 40 feet long, from the hillside mouth to his cabin foundation. The rough dirt walls measured 24 inches wide by 24 inches high, cut straight through clay and loam without any lining or reinforcement.